There is a moment in modern dating that feels counterintuitive, uncomfortable, and almost wrong to most men. It is the moment when you stop explaining yourself, stop filling the silence, and stop trying to manage how you are perceived. Not because you are angry, not because you are trying to prove a point, but because you simply go quiet. And that moment changes everything. Most men are taught that silence is dangerous. They believe that if they stop talking, the connection will die. If they stop clarifying, misunderstandings will grow. If they stop reassuring, attraction will fade. So when tension appears, they rush to speak. They rush to fix. They rush to be understood. That instinct feels logical, but it is precisely why silence becomes so powerful when it finally appears. Silence does not change the dynamic because it creates distance. It changes the dynamic because it removes certainty. When the familiar rhythm of explanation, reassurance, and emotional availability suddenly stops, the mind does not relax, it becomes active. The narrative pauses mid-scene, and unfinished stories are psychologically uncomfortable. This is the part most men never learn. A woman does not lose emotional balance because you disappear. She loses emotional balance because the emotional script she expected no longer continues. The feedback loop breaks. And when there is no reaction, no clarification, and no emotional pursuit, the dynamic becomes unresolved. Going quiet is not about ignoring someone. It is about no longer narrating yourself. The moment you stop explaining who you are, what you feel, and where you stand, the other person's mind begins filling in the gaps. And the stories the mind creates are often far more powerful than anything you could have said. Silence is not a tactic. It is a psychological turning point, and most men fail it without ever realizing a test was taking place. Silence is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in modern dating, not because it is weak, but because it is usually applied at the wrong time and for the wrong reason. Many men believe that going quiet is a universal solution, something that automatically creates attraction regardless of context. In reality, silence only works when it removes emotional resolution at a moment where resolution is expected. Timing is everything. When you go quiet too early, before emotional investment exists, nothing happens. There is no attachment to disrupt, no certainty to break, and no narrative to interrupt. In that phase, silence does not feel powerful. It feels empty. It fades into absence instead of provoking reflection. The mind has nothing to lose, so it does not engage. When you go quiet too late, after you have already over-explained, reassured repeatedly, or emotionally over-invested, silence feels reactive. It looks like withdrawal rather than self-direction. Reactive silence communicates emotional damage, not strength. Instead of creating uncertainty, it signals instability, which weakens the dynamic rather than recalibrating it. The moment silence becomes powerful is very specific. It is when explanation is expected. It is when reassurance is assumed. It is when you are anticipated to fill the emotional gap. That expectation is the key. When silence appears at that exact moment, it removes something that was unconsciously relied on. The familiar emotional rhythm stops. The feedback loop breaks. When a feedback loop breaks, the mind does not relax. It becomes active. Uncertainty replaces certainty, and uncertainty is uncomfortable. Most men rush to end that discomfort because they believe discomfort means loss. In reality, discomfort is the doorway to reflection, and reflection is where attraction recalibrates. When you go quiet at the right moment, nothing dramatic happens on the surface. There is no immediate reaction, no emotional outburst, and no obvious shift in behavior. This is where most men become confused. They expect change to be visible right away, and when it is not, they assume silence is failing. In reality, psychological change rarely begins on the surface. It begins internally. When the familiar emotional feedback disappears, the mind does not relax. It starts working. The reassurance she expected does not arrive. The explanation she assumed would come never does. That absence creates a psychological gap her nervous system was not prepared for. And that gap becomes the center of attention. Instead of moving forward emotionally, the mind turns inward. She begins replaying recent interactions, not emotionally, but analytically. Moments that once felt certain are re-examined. Assumptions she did not realize she was making are quietly questioned. The belief that emotional access was stable, predictable, or guaranteed begins to loosen. Silence interrupts the internal story she was unconsciously following. This is where discomfort appears, not panic, not longing, but uncertainty. And uncertainty is powerful because the mind hates unresolved narratives. It searches for meaning. It tries to categorize what the silence represents. Is it confidence, detachment, independence, or something else entirely? That ambiguity destabilizes emotional certainty. Most men believe silence works because it creates distance. That is not true. Silence works because it removes narrative control. When you stop narrating yourself, the other person's mind fills the space. And the stories the mind creates are far more influential than any clarification you could offer. This is also why men ruin this phase so often. They break silence to explain, reassure, or reduce confusion. In doing so, they provide exactly what the mind was searching for: resolution. And the moment resolution appears, uncertainty collapses. The dynamic resets. Silence only works when uncertainty is allowed to exist without interference. The moment silence begins doing its psychological work is the exact moment most men destroy it, not because they are weak, but because discomfort activates an old survival instinct. Uncertainty feels urgent. The body interprets it as a problem that must be solved immediately. And the fastest way to restore emotional balance is to speak. Most men break silence not because they genuinely want to reconnect, but because they want relief. Silence creates tension inside them just as much as it creates tension inside her. The difference is that high-value men tolerate that tension, while others rush to escape it. And this is where the dynamic collapses. When you break silence to clarify, reassure, or explain, you are not communicating strength. You are communicating emotional urgency. Even if your words are calm and reasonable, the timing reveals need, and need restores certainty instantly. The unresolved loop closes, her nervous system relaxes, the mind stops searching inward. Whatever recalibration was quietly happening disappears without a trace. Many men misinterpret this as progress. Conversation resumes, the tension eases, responses come back, but the dynamic has not improved. It has reset. This is why silence never works for so many men. They never allow it to complete its psychological process. They interrupt it the moment it becomes uncomfortable for them, not realizing that discomfort was the signal it was working. Another reason men break silence too early is fear of being forgotten. They believe relevance is maintained through presence and frequency. In reality, relevance is created through emotional impact. Silence at the right moment increases impact because it removes predictability. High-value men do not ask silence to produce reassurance. They allow silence to reveal truth. They do not fear losing someone who requires constant emotional management to stay aligned. Their silence is not heavy, bitter, or performative. It is calm, grounded, and self-directed. And that is why it changes the dynamic without a single word being spoken. When she reaches out while you are quiet, most men feel an immediate surge of relief. The silence breaks, tension eases, and the mind quickly labels this moment as success. That interpretation is exactly what causes most men to lose the advantage they just created. Her reaching out is not the end of the process. It is the test. Psychologically, she is not necessarily trying to reconnect. She is checking whether the silence meant something real or whether emotional access is still available on demand. She is testing whether certainty still exists. Most men fail this test by restoring it immediately. They reply too quickly. They engage too deeply. They reopen emotional conversation and return to the same rhythm that existed before the silence. Even when the words sound neutral, the energy communicates availability. And availability restores certainty faster than any explanation ever could. Once certainty returns, the silence loses all psychological power. The dynamic snaps back to its old balance. A high-value man responds differently. He does not ignore her to maintain control, and he does not rush to re-establish closeness. His response is calm, present, and proportionate. He allows contact without reopening emotional depth. This distinction is critical. Responding does not mean re-entering emotionally. You can acknowledge without engaging. You can be polite without restoring access. When your response does not accelerate the interaction, uncertainty remains active. The question stays unanswered. The recalibration continues instead of collapsing. Most men sabotage this moment because they fear losing momentum. In reality, momentum comes from unresolved tension, not conversation. Another common mistake is reopening the past, asking why she pulled away, seeking clarity, or revisiting emotional history turns silence into discussion. Discussion creates resolution. Resolution ends movement. A grounded man stays present-focused. He allows behavior over time to reveal intention. If she reaches out again and finds you unchanged, attraction stabilizes. If she does not, the connection dissolves cleanly without costing your self-respect. Both outcomes are strength. After you go quiet and hold your position correctly, her behavior may begin to shift in ways that feel confusing at first. She might suddenly become warmer and more attentive. She might become colder and more distant, or she may move unpredictably between the two. Most men misread these shifts and react emotionally, undoing the recalibration without realizing it. All three responses come from the same place: uncertainty. When emotional certainty disappears, the nervous system experiments. It tests different behaviors to see which one restores balance. Warmth is an attempt to re-establish closeness. Coldness is an attempt to regain control. Inconsistency is an attempt to provoke a reaction. None of these are answers. They are probes. Most men fail here because they respond to the probe instead of maintaining posture. When she becomes warmer, they open up too quickly and reward the behavior with emotional access. When she becomes colder, they chase reassurance or withdraw defensively. When she becomes inconsistent, they try to stabilize the dynamic. Each reaction hands control back and restores certainty. A high-value man responds the same way to all three shifts. He remains steady. His emotional posture does not change based on tone. His availability remains intentional. His life rhythm continues forward without adjustment. This consistency is what makes the silence real. When warmth is met with calm presence instead of emotional reward, it does not inflate ego. When coldness is met with non-reactivity instead of pursuit, it loses leverage. When inconsistency is met with consistency, it exhausts itself. Over time, the dynamic stops oscillating. Most men believe attraction grows through emotional responsiveness. In reality, attraction stabilizes through predictability of self, not predictability of attention. When your behavior remains grounded regardless of hers, the connection either matures naturally or dissolves honestly. Both outcomes are clarity, not failure. When silence stretches longer than you expected, this is where most men break posture. Not because they did something wrong, but because time amplifies doubt. The mind begins asking uncomfortable questions. Did I wait too long? Did I miss my chance? Did she move on? That internal noise becomes the real threat, not the silence itself. Long silence does not mean nothing is happening. It means something unresolved remains unresolved. Psychologically, extended silence leads to one of two outcomes. Either attraction reorganizes internally through reflection, or the dynamic dissolves because it was held together only by emotional leverage. Both outcomes are clarity, but only one feels comfortable in the moment. Most men confuse discomfort with danger. As silence continues, the nervous system looks for relief. The fastest relief is reaching out. Not because it is the right move, but because it ends uncertainty. This is why men abandon posture here. They trade long-term self-respect for short-term comfort. A grounded man does not do this. He understands that silence is not a countdown. It is a filter. The longer silence exists without reaction, the clearer the truth becomes. If attraction reforms, it does so from reflection, not pressure. If it fades honestly without damaging dignity. This is where real strength is tested. Remaining aligned during extended silence means your emotional state is no longer dependent on response or timing. Your stability no longer hinges on outcome. That independence is felt even in absence. Ironically, this is also when reach-outs happen most often, not because you waited longer, but because the emotional loop was never closed. And unresolved loops naturally pull attention back. If nothing returns, you still win, because you did not abandon yourself to preserve a dynamic that required emotional management to survive. That is not loss, that is maturity. Silence becomes dangerous when it is driven by emotion instead of clarity. Many men confuse strategic silence with emotional withdrawal, and the consequences are completely different. One communicates self-direction, the other communicates injury. Even without words, the difference is felt. Strategic silence is clean. It is not fueled by anger, fear, or a need to punish. It is simply the absence of unnecessary emotional output. The man continues living his life with structure, purpose, and rhythm. His silence is not heavy. It does not carry resentment. It does not seek reaction. It exists because there is nothing that needs to be said. Emotional withdrawal, on the other hand, is loaded. It carries tension, bitterness, and unspoken demands. Even without contact, it leaks through energy when interaction resumes. It creates defensiveness instead of curiosity. It does not invite reflection. It creates emotional pressure. Most men fall into emotional withdrawal without realizing it. They go quiet, hoping she will feel bad, miss them, or chase harder. That intention poisons the silence. Silence with expectation is not silence. It is manipulation without leverage. A high-value man does not use silence to extract emotion. He uses silence to protect alignment. He is not waiting for a message. He is not counting days. He is not mentally rehearsing what he will say if she reaches out. His mind is not parked in the outcome. This is why silence works only when you are willing to accept either result. If she returns with consistency, the connection continues from a stronger foundation. If she does not, nothing was lost that was stable to begin with. Silence does not create attraction from nothing. It reveals whether attraction can exist without constant emotional maintenance. That revelation is its true purpose. At a certain point, silence is no longer something you use. It becomes something you are. This is where most men misunderstand the end goal. Silence is not meant to be a tactic you deploy to change someone's behavior. It is meant to be a reflection of self-control, emotional independence, and internal stability. When silence becomes a standard, you no longer ask, "Should I text or wait?" You act only when action aligns with purpose, not anxiety. Communication becomes intentional instead of reactive. Words carry weight because they are no longer constant. Presence becomes meaningful because it is not guaranteed. Women feel this shift immediately, not because of mystery, but because emotional access is no longer automatic. Attention is no longer freely available. It must be earned through consistency and respect. This changes the entire dynamic. You are no longer responding to emotional fluctuations. You are observing behavior and deciding whether it fits into your life. Most men live in performance mode. They speak to maintain interest, explain to reduce tension, and reassure to avoid loss. A man who has made silence his standard does none of this. He does not manage emotions that are not his responsibility. He does not chase clarity from inconsistency. At this level, silence is not absence. It is selectivity. It signals that your time, energy, and emotional bandwidth are finite and valuable. This naturally filters connections. Only those capable of meeting you in stability remain. This is the moment silence changes everything permanently, because it no longer depends on outcome. Whether someone stays or leaves, your internal posture does not shift. And that posture, not silence itself, is what creates respect, attraction, and long-term power.